Have you ever wondered what happens when paradise starts to crack and reality begins to bleed through the perfect facade? When the life you're living feels too good to be true because it actually is, and when questioning everything around you becomes the only way to survive. Alice and Jack Chambers appear to have it all in Victory, a pristine desert community frozen in the aesthetic of the 1950s where everything gleams with an almost supernatural perfection. Every morning unfolds like clockwork as Alice prepares breakfast for Jack, watching him leave for work at Victory headquarters alongside all the other husbands who depart simultaneously for their mysterious jobs in the surrounding desert. The wives remain behind to embrace their roles as homemakers, attending ballet classes led by Shelley, the elegant wife of Frank, the charismatic founder of the Victory Project, who holds an almost godlike status among the residents. Alice spends her days with her best friend Bunny and other wives, cooking, cleaning, and enjoying the luxuries this community provides. And when the men return each evening, the couples share passionate intimacy that seems to validate the perfection of their existence. The first cracks in this flawless reality appear through Margaret, a woman who has become increasingly isolated from the community after an unauthorized trip into the desert resulted in what everyone claims was her son's passing, though Margaret insists Victory took him as punishment for breaking the rules. At a party hosted by Frank and Shelley, Alice witnesses Margaret's husband Ted attempting to medicate her after she makes unsettling comments about how the women aren't supposed to be there. And later that same evening, Alice and Jack slip away to Frank's bedroom where they become intimate, only for Alice to notice Frank standing silently in the doorway, observing them with an unreadable expression. The encounter leaves Alice with an uneasy feeling she cannot quite articulate, a sense that something lurks beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect world. While riding the trolley through the desert, Alice witnesses what appears to be a plane crashing into the mountainside near Victory headquarters, and despite the driver's protests that the location isn't part of his route, she rushes on foot toward the crash site to help potential survivors. Instead of wreckage, Alice stumbles upon the headquarters building itself and finds herself drawn to its mirror-like windows, and when she touches the reflective surface, disturbing hallucinations flood her mind, showing synchronized dancers, drops of blood, and hearing Frank's voice echoing through her consciousness before she suddenly wakes up in her own bed that night with no memory of how she returned home. Jack insists the plane crash never happened, and that Alice was home all afternoon, his dismissiveness adding to her growing confusion about what is real and what might be imagined. Margaret reaches out to Alice by phone, desperately asking if she saw the plane too, but Alice denies everything and tells Margaret not to contact her again, trying to distance herself from the increasingly troubled woman. Shortly after, Alice discovers Margaret standing on her roof, and as Alice runs to help, Margaret looks directly at her before drawing a blade across her own throat and falling from the building, her body immediately surrounded by men in red jumpsuits who pull Alice away before she can reach her friend. The official story that follows claims Margaret simply had a household accident while cleaning windows and is recovering in the hospital with stitches. But Alice knows what she witnessed, and Jack's insistence that she's mistaken only deepens her paranoia. Dr. Collins, the town physician, arrives to examine Alice and suggests she needs medication for exhaustion, though both she and Jack initially decline. But Alice manages to steal Margaret's medical file from the doctor's briefcase, finding it heavily redacted and marked as a security risk before she burns it in frustration. Collins privately warns Jack that Ted no longer works for the Victory Project due to Margaret's problems, implying that if Alice doesn't conform, they too could lose everything they have together. Alice's experiences grow increasingly surreal as she sees visions of Margaret smashing her head against mirrors during ballet class, discovers that the eggs she tries to cook are completely hollow with nothing inside the shells, and while bathing, she slips underwater only to have her reflection stare back at her with apparent consciousness. At a major company celebration, Frank announces Jack's promotion to the senior advisory board, leading the crowd in a chant asking whose world this is, with everyone responding in unison that it belongs to them. But Alice feels overwhelmed and retreats to the bathroom, where Bunny confronts her about her suspicions. Alice attempts to explain that something is fundamentally wrong with Victory, that she went to headquarters and saw things that don't make sense, but Bunny reacts with anger and accuses her of jeopardizing their livelihood the same way Margaret did. During a dinner party Alice and Jack host for Frank, Shelley, and other couples, Alice begins pointing out disturbing patterns she's noticed, such as how all the wives have nearly identical stories about meeting their husbands involving dropped train tickets, and how they all come from just a handful of cities. She openly accuses Frank of orchestrating something sinister and controlling every aspect of their lives, including the food they consume. But Frank manages to make her appear unstable and delusional to the other guests, though he privately tells Alice he was hoping someone would challenge him. Jack is humiliated by Alice's outburst, and when she confronts him afterward, insisting that Frank confirmed her suspicions, Jack dismisses her completely, so Alice begs him to leave Victory with her immediately. Jack appears to agree, and they head toward their car. But as soon as they reach the driveway, men in red jumpsuits emerge and drag Alice away while she screams for Jack to help her. But he remains in the vehicle, only able to yell in anguish as she's taken to receive treatment from Dr. Collins. During the procedure, which appears to involve some form of therapy meant to reset her thinking, Alice experiences vivid flashes of a completely different life, where she exists in the present day as Alice Warren, an overworked surgical resident who barely has time or energy for Jack, who is unemployed and feels neglected by her demanding career. In this other reality, Jack feels increasingly frustrated and worthless, spending his time listening to motivational content created by Frank about how modern society has stripped men of happiness and purpose. After the treatment, Alice returns to her daily routine in Victory, but rather than being cured, she begins to understand that these visions aren't hallucinations at all, but actual memories of her real life. She remembers that Jack visited Frank's operation and enrolled them both in the Victory program, receiving devices that he used to imprison Alice in their apartment, keeping her sedated and connected to the simulation against her will, while he pays for her continued captivity by working a regular job in the real world. Alice confronts Jack with this recovered knowledge, and he confesses that Victory is a simulated reality created by Frank, where men who feel emasculated or dissatisfied can live out fantasy versions of their lives with their partners. Except the women trapped in the simulation have no idea their existence, their daily activities, and even their children are entirely artificial. Each day, when the husbands supposedly leave for work at headquarters, they're actually logging out of the simulation to perform real jobs that fund keeping their wives imprisoned in this virtual paradise. And Jack argues that Alice was miserable in reality, while in Victory they can finally both be happy. But Alice is enraged that he stole her autonomy and trapped her in this prison without her consent. Jack desperately begs Alice to stay, grabbing her forcefully as she tries to pull away, and in the struggle, Alice seizes a glass and strikes him across the head with enough force to end his life, both within the simulation and in the real world, where his physical body also expires. Frank is immediately alerted to Jack's passing within the system, and throughout Victory, small explosions begin occurring as street lamps burst, and the carefully maintained reality starts to destabilize. Bunny finds Alice and reveals that she has known the truth about the simulation all along, but chose to remain because, in Victory, she can be with her children, who passed away in the real world, and she urges Alice to take a car and drive to headquarters because that location serves as the exit portal from the simulation. Bunny warns that Frank's security forces will eliminate Alice if she doesn't escape, explaining that harming someone in the simulation causes their real body to perish as well. Alice flees in a neighbor's vehicle with the men in red suits pursuing her through the desert, and Dr. Collins joins the chase. But Alice slams on her brakes, causing Collins to collide with several of the security vehicles, resulting in a fatal crash that eliminates multiple pursuers. Meanwhile, back at Frank's home, Shelley produces a blade and plunges it into Frank's abdomen, telling him he ruined everything by failing to contain Alice's rebellion. And she declares that now it's her turn to control Victory. Alice pushes the car up the mountainside until it becomes stuck, blocking the path and forcing her to continue on foot while more security personnel climb after her. She reaches the mirror-like structure at headquarters and experiences the final vision of Jack appearing behind her, asking her to stay with him. But she refuses and runs to touch the reflective surface just as the security forces close in. The moment her hands make contact with the mirror, Alice is bombarded with disturbing imagery mixed with glimpses of herself in the real world, and the screen cuts to black as the sound of Alice gasping for air suggests she has successfully escaped the simulation and awakened in reality. The entire Victory project stands exposed as an elaborate virtual prison where insecure men trap their partners to live out fantasies of traditional domestic bliss while the women exist without knowledge or consent, their real bodies held captive and sedated in the present day. Alice's journey from accepting the perfect surface of Victory to recognizing its sinister foundation and fighting her way back to reality demonstrates the dangers of systems that strip away individual autonomy under the guise of providing happiness. With Frank eliminated by his own wife who now seeks control of the simulation and Alice potentially free in the real world with knowledge of the criminal operation, the future of Victory and its trapped inhabitants remains uncertain.